So we got ourselves another glorious Friday afternoon, and we have ourselves yet another Chevy Cruze. Now, I promise we're not trying to pick on these things. They do a pretty good job of picking on themselves, to be honest. I mean, they have a variety of issues, and they just really can't seem to get out of their own way. Now, the reason this one's in here today is because it's just a simple coolant leak, right? So we diagnosed it, and we found just this little coolant hose. No problem, right? Well, wrong. This thing actually goes behind the turbo, and reading through the service information, we have to pull the turbocharger off just to replace it. Awesome design, right? So that's what we're going to do today. That's why you see all these parts in front of me. Now, when you remove the turbochargers on these, they have a whole bunch of stuff. They have plastic hoses, another good idea. They have a whole bunch of, feed tubes, return tubes, and gaskets. And when you pull these turbos off, it's a really good idea to replace this stuff because you don't want to run into yet another problem after you go through all the work of pulling it off and then putting it back on. Which brings me to my next point, the turbochargers themselves. Now, this is yet another problem that these things have. They always have bad turbos, right? They have their P0299 low boost codes. They have their cracked wastegates. They have their leaking oil. They have a whole bunch of issues. So it's always a good idea when you're pulling them off is to maybe just put one on. But this car doesn't have those symptoms yet, and the owner of the car opted to actually inspect the turbo before he puts the money into replacing it. So for today, since it's getting pretty late here and we want to get our parts order in case we need that turbo, we're just going to pull this thing off. So we're going to pull it off, we're going to inspect it, make sure that wastegate's not cracked, make sure the fins of the turbo are good, and if they are, it's going to go back together just with the other 47 parts you need to take the turbo off and put it back on. And if it is bad, we're going to try to get that turbo, but we're running out of time here, so let's get at it. All right, I'm going to start by just getting as much stuff out of the way as possible. Let's start with this air tube here. This is a 7mm. These things really like to stick on there. And be careful, you can tear these boots pretty easily if you pull too hard, and you'll be at the Cruze parts store again. Okay, should we get in here? There we go. And we got a lot of little plastic here too, and another thing, just always be careful. Everything likes to break. Get a pick here. So grab a. See if I can get under here. There's a little release tab here you can push in, but a lot of times it doesn't release it enough. So if you just get a pick in there, a lot of times you can pop those up. There we go. This little tube is actually held on by a clamp that has to be removed down here. It's for the bypass. All right. Just kind of real gingerly get this out of the way. And if this breaks, I would recommend replacing it. Don't try to fix it. Okay, we got our boost solenoid here. All right. Okay. Next, and we drained the coolant on here before we started it. I forgot to mention that. Make sure you drain the coolant, otherwise you're going to make a mess when you unplug a lot of this or disconnect a lot of this stuff, and then you're going to be working with wet coolant hands the whole time. I'll pull this little clamp off here. And this is actually the hose that's leaking on here. We had to pull this up to see it, but this is where the rubber meets this little metal fitting here. This is right where she's leaking, and it's causing us all that trouble. Now this is an oil line, so when you remove it, make sure that you plug it right away because you don't want to get any contaminants in there, especially if you're going to reuse the turbo. This little banjo bolt. I'm just going to leave that there till I get the other side out. Now a lot of the bolts on stuff on these cruises are these inward Torx bolts. They put them all over the place. These are the valve cover, but this is where that oil tube gets connected to. And this is also an inward Torx. This is actually an E10 they're calling it. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to get a set of these if you're working on a cruise or if you have one, because you're going to need them a lot on this engine. And pay really good attention to how all this stuff comes off and in what order, because everything kind of layers on top, and if everything kind of has to go on in that same area or that same time, otherwise you're going to kind of get stuck. So here's a oil feed tube. And with this off, I'm just going to reattach this bolt in here just to protect any contaminants from kind of falling in there. Also with this, you're going to have to pull the cat off, so I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the oxygen sensor right away. It's going to pry up on this little thing here, and it should slip out. Should slip out. There we go. Just wrote that underneath here. Okay. And now there's another rubber tube down here. This is going to be the where the air comes in from the intercooler, and this is also going to have to come off. So where actually the boost air comes through. Also a 7mm. Switch to a little power here. Be careful not to poke a hole in here, as you'll have some boost leak. But these tubes can really stick on there and get stuck, and you kind of just gotta break the seal that they form between the turbocharger and the rubber here. Once you get them busted loose, so they should come off fairly easy. There we go. Now I have this clamp taken off already. I'm going to remove this coolant tube from this hose here, and this is getting replaced. Remember, I'm replacing a lot of this too, so if you're replacing it, you can be a little more medieval with it. You know, if it breaks, it's not the biggest deal in the world since it's getting replaced. You have another inward Torx that's actually holding this tube on. So it's connected here, and then it's actually bolted to the block with this inward Torx right here. Okay, so we got our oil tube off, our coolant tube off, oxygen sensor disconnected. Got all of our stuff here. All right, I think the next step we're going to do is we're going to get this thing in the air, and then we're going to pull that catalytic converter, the bolts on the bottom of that catalytic converter, so we can get that cat off of here. Actually, before I disconnect it from the bottom, I got to pull this clamp off because the cat won't come up this way. It's got to go down. So I'm going to pull this this kind of like this tube clamp here, and it's actually connected with a bolt right here. And it looks to be, I'm thinking about a 13 millimeter.
Now that bolt never breaks, right?
Oh, definitely not. We actually have a new clamp that we're going to use too. These things like to snap, so we actually have a new clamp we're going to use. Let's get that thing disconnected here.
No way, that's coming out by hand.
So many times you got the magic touch.
Dude, it's Friday afternoon. No way.
Beautiful.
What? Somebody's getting a lottery ticket tonight.
And then once you get it loose, you can just kind of spread it a little bit, and it'll actually open up, and you can see there's a seam here, and these things just kind of seam together with a gasket right here. But to get it out the rest of the way, we're going to have to go underneath her and pull the other 3 bolts out. So let's get it up. Okay, so here's the other end of the cat. We got 3 bolts here. They look like they've been in Wisconsin for a while, so hopefully these things come out. Hopefully I don't break them. Let's see what we got going on here. All right, that's one. Bolt is the bolt is definitely not stuck in the socket. We're gonna have to get an extension here. And 3. And we go. Okay, so there's also a mounting bolt right here. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. Let's see if I can get some light in here. There's a mounting bolt right here that actually holds it's like a brace for the converter. You have to remove that too, as you'll be pulling on that thing all day trying to get it to release. Ask me how I know. Okay. And that is a 10 millimeter here. I don't know if it always was a 10 millimeter or Russ made it a 10 millimeter, but this one's a 10 millimeter. All right. Okay. We're good to go. Let's see if we can get her to loosen up here. Do we miss one? I think we actually have one more brace bolt up there that I forgot about.
Ask him how he knows.
So in perfect engineering fashion here, all the bolts under here are different sizes. You know, why not? It makes it interesting. This is actually a 13. All right. And it goes this way. It's another bolt going this way. And be careful. Remember, the cat is loose. It could drop. You don't want it to drop and break the substrate. And you also don't want it to hit you in the noggin. Not on Friday afternoon. Monday morning.
Or fall in the coolant bucket.
Cruisers are used to burning coolant. It's fine. Now the reason I'm not using an electric tool here because I don't know how far it's going to back out, and I don't want to get stuck. Success. Okay.
Meow.
And there she is. This is that little seal that I was talking about before, where it seals and that clamp goes around. Here is the brace that you couldn't see before with the bolt coming this way. It was a 13. And then we had the nut here and the 3 bolts there. Now we got this thing out of the way, we can move on to getting that turbo out of here. Okay, so with just the cat removed, and this is the wastegate, you can actually see that it is cracked right there. Now, we know this thing doesn't have a code yet, but with that crack, it's only going to get worse. And with that wastegate not sealing, it's going to eventually cause a low boost concern. So we still need to get this thing all the way off, but we already know without removing the whole thing that it looks like we're gonna actually have to replace the turbo on here. Okay, now if you're wondering why you have to remove that cat, it's because you need to get to these two bolts right here, and this is where the oil drains down back into the block from the turbo. Now, if you're sneaky, you can sometimes get this thing removed without pulling the cat, but for just a few bolts and some gaskets, I like to just do it this way. It makes it just a little bit easier for me. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna pull these two bolts off, and watch out, you might get some oil draining down on you. All right. Now you can see our oil drain is disconnected from the bottom of the turbo. So now we're gonna go back to the top, disconnect everything else, and get this thing off the car. Okay, with the cat out of the way, you can see that the clamp that we loosened before is kind of stuck in there. So it might be a good idea to put this on before you install the turbo. Otherwise, it might be kind of hard to get it in there. You can see it kind of just sits like that. Okay, so there's another coolant hose that we really have to worry about here, and this is kind of the tougher part of this job. It actually has a special tool, but you don't have to have it. You just have to be very mindful. Now, the hose is hard to see. We'll see if we can get a shot of it. It actually goes against the block, and it's kind of like a hex right down here. You can see it. The reason they make a special tool is because it's actually a banjo bolt, and when you loosen or tighten it, you have to avoid kind of bending and kinking the hose. So if it starts to bend or kink, you're gonna wanna use something in there like a screwdriver or something to hold it while you tighten and loosen it. Now what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to get an extension, and you actually have to go kind of through the, whoops. You actually kind of gotta go through the bottom here to get down in there. And this can be a little tricky, just take your time. Get this out of the way here. Now it's kind of hard to see, but the little silver there, that is actually the socket on the bolt that goes on the block this way. You just kind of gotta run a extension through, and here's the other end of my extension to loosen it up. Now again, there is a special tool to hold it so you don't kink the hose. I'm not worried about it when I'm taking it apart because I'm going to replace that bolt anyway. And once you loosen it, even though we drain the coolant, I just released a hole on the block, so you're gonna probably get a little more coolant out when you take it out. Lost my socket there. Okay, now that we got all the coolant and oil hoses off here, and all the tubing and all that, we need to remove it from the manifold. So actually it's part of the manifold. We gotta remove the manifold from the head, and it's gonna be all these bolts here. Now, from the factory, these are 10 millimeter. If you look at them now, there's a good chance maybe they're just a little bit different in size from the rust, but we're gonna figure that out as we go along here.
Good thing we got new ones.
Yeah, the good thing about these is they're actually almost like a copper or brass type bolt that's kind of like a softer metal. So they really don't stick too much. I mean, they come out pretty easily even if they're rusty.
Or they bring the whole stud with them.
That's always fun. I'm gonna have to pull this oil plug out of the way. This is actually the banjo bolt for the oil feed to get to that nether bolt. But if you're reusing this turbo, which we're not too worried about anymore, make sure you don't get anything in there You'll wreck a turbo real fast if you get any metal shavings or rust in there because it'll go right through the bearings of the turbo. Now for this one, I'm actually going to use a ratchet because I don't want to get jammed up in the fan here if this thing moves out a little too fast. Mike is cringing at me right now because I'm not using a power tool. I'm old school.
Sounds like wrist problems in 10 years.
All right, we have one left. It looks like a real pain here. Let's see if we can get it with.
So Ryan, what's better, the Chevy Cruze or the Chevy Cavalier?
I have to say Chevy Cavalier because I've actually owned a Cavalier. That was my first car. Was a Chevy Cavalier.
What year?
1990 Chevy Cavalier.
Ooh, the old body style.
RS, 2.2 liters of power.
I had a 94, 4-door.
My driver's seat was actually held down by exhaust clamps with holes drilled through the floor because the seat rusted out from the power. It had so much power when it took off that it would push back on the seat so hard.
There's only one way to get the tires to squeal on those cars.
Bleach?
You gotta be going backwards first.
Oh, yeah.
What color was it?
Oh, she was gray.
Mine
Nice red pinstripe.
Oh, mine was blue.
That was nothing. Okay, so it should be loose here. Now it looks like we actually have a little bit of a electrical connecting holder here. A little plastic tab that holds this electrical connector, and we're gonna have to make sure we get that loosened quick. So get underneath here once and get that off of there. Go figure, the plastic is stronger than the metal that it's on. Okay, so if you're still with us after watching me struggle to get all these manifold bolts off, be very careful about this piece right here. Now, I've put these things on more than one time forgetting to put this on. This really needs to be there. And guess what you get to do if you torque all the bolts down, get everything done, and then find this laying in your toolbox. And it's not throw it in the trash. That's not the answer.
That's not scrap.
All right, if my calculations are correct, this thing should be ready to be removed from the car. Ooh, and there she is. Let's try not to leak too much here. I'll try to give you a better look of that crack that we've seen in here before. Okay, so I'm going to remove the wastegate here just so I can lift up the wastegate valve here so you guys can actually see that crack a little better. And this is what typically fails on these. Oop, dropped something there. Worry about that at a different time.
I mean, usually these are the low boost concern ones.
Okay.
Right?
I suppose I could have just taken the clip off. That probably would have been smarter.
There it is.
All right, let's see if we can get this thing all the way open here. Now, if you look real closely here, you can see that there's just a little crack forming here, and it's not bad enough to set a code yet. But what this is when this closes, it makes the exhaust gas flow to make the turbo spin. Now, if this leaks, it's just like the wastegate opening up and letting the exhaust go out the exhaust without spinning the turbo. And what it can actually do is cause you to have a low boost concern. Now, why this isn't terrible yet, it's probably a good idea to replace it because we have it off, and it's not going to be long before this thing has an issue.
How's the blades in there look okay?
The impeller does look okay. I don't see any chips or anything like that. It's normal to have a little gray material on there. It seems like it spins pretty freely. I don't really see an issue with that, but this is definitely going to be an issue.